Your effectiveness as a professional writer hinges on your ability to understand and implement a sophisticated content strategy. Many writers want to continue to grow in their skills and in their career. And to my thinking, a huge part of that is the ability to see a broader scope of what writing can achieve for a business, what great copywriting can achieve. If you are thinking in this way and you want to become a little bit more strategically minded in your copywriting practice and in your copywriting career, then listen to this video. Subscribe to my channel. Be focused on upskilling in the things that help you become not just a better writer, but also a better business person. So today I'm going to talk to you about the 4 things that you need to know and that you need to be able to evaluate and understand to put together a good content strategy. I'm Joy Yule. I'm the owner of Hire a Writer, which is a world-class copywriting agency. I'm also a content consultant, and most of what I have been able to achieve in my career is because I can see past the simple one-to-one transactional reality of being a copywriter, getting assigned a blog and writing a blog, getting assigned an ad and writing an ad, and I can see further into the strategic directives, and I'm able to put together strategies that help companies make a lot of money on the copy that I write. So I think that that has been a really valuable skill for me. It's something that I constantly train my people on, always wanting them to move from being just tactical into the strategic mindedness of it. So we did this training actually internally a few weeks ago, and I think that it was valuable because it not only helps you understand the 4 things that you need to evaluate in order to put a content strategy together, it also shows you the actual frameworks that we have into place. And I really hound on this because I think that putting frameworks into place is what makes you more efficient, and it makes you able to replicate processes that work. So I'm going to show you both things. I'm going to show you the actual pillars of, evaluation criteria and metrics that you need to apply to be able to devise a good content strategy. And I'm going to show you the tools and the frameworks that we use at Hire a Writer to facilitate that a little bit more efficiently. So let's dive in. So I am going to share my screen, and this is going to have a lot of the actual, like I said, pieces that we use at Hire a Writer. There are 4 things that you need to know before you can do a content strategy. Audience. So you need to know who the company that you are writing for is talking to. You need to know the product. And that sounds simple, but a shocking amount of people, you can ask a group of executives at a startup, what do you sell? And you can get as many answers as there are people. You need to know what the product is, and that also just by kind of nature of, relatedness, you need to know the competition. You need to know the channels that are available to you. So too often, novice strategists will get into and put together a really elaborate strategy, and then it's like, oh wait, but those channels, they don't actually have a really good, setup for TikTok, or they don't have the ability to deploy the strategy on the channel that you've recommended. So you have to know the channels, and you have to know the systems. Do they have a CRM? Which CRM? There are these very mechanical kind of technical things that you need to understand to know whether or not a strategy is actually going to work. These are in order, by the way. So you have to know the audience first. It is absolutely paramount. You cannot replace it. And one of the things that I like to remind people of is that almost invariably, if you go into a business that has any kind of that's existed for more than 10 minutes, they have some kind of audience, right? They've defined the audience in some way. Often the ICPs, or the ideal client profiles that you get handed, are either outdated or they're so jargon heavy that they don't actually mean anything. So people get really into this. They get really into crafting these narratives around their audience. And I mean, we do it. If you've looked at my channel, we've got brand voice training, we've got all kinds of stuff. And I think knowing audience and the psychographics and the demographics is hugely important. But it becomes outdated fast. And as a writer, it's really your job, and as a content strategist especially, it's really your job to see the forest. You often can't see the forest for the trees. You've got to be able to figure out, based on if you get a deck of audience and persona information, you have to figure out what of that actually matters. What of that actually is going to be able to translate into either where you find an audience or how you communicate and connect to that audience. So I would suggest to you that probably the first piece of collateral you have to ask for from any client is audience information. Figure out who they think their audience is, and then kind of do your own validation of it, right? Now, this is going to feel wildly inappropriate, so do not be offended. But one of the things that I teach my people to do is build audience categories in your mind. And one of the most efficient ways to do that is to stereotype. These things are not always true. right? Stereotypes are not always true, but there are certain kinds of stereotypes that you can kind of collect in your mind that help you more quickly understand a group of people. And this is not in a judgmental sense, right? This is literally just, we know that boomers are not statistically as likely to be tech savvy. Okay. Are there tons of boomers who are tech savvy? Sure. But more likely than not, they aren't, right? We also know that there's plenty of research about which social platforms different groups of people congregate on, things like that. So I would suggest to you that you start building categorization on your own, because it will make you incredibly useful, first of all, to businesses and to clients, but it also helps you get to the finish line faster of like, who are we talking to and how do I talk to these people? And you can kind of start to hone little nuances in the way that you communicate and the way that you write that helps you relate to people in these different categories. So the audience categorization framework that we use is, first of all, by age. So collect by age. Gender. Now this is less firm for certain generations than it is for others, but there are absolutely gender related kind of stereotypes that you can build to help you architect some, just go to archetypes in your mind, understanding it's a baseline, like it's a starting point, and then you got to build on it based on the specificity of the audience and the client and all that. By income, there are absolutely lower, middle, and upper class income dynamics that you can kind of memorize and begin to understand, because when it comes to value drivers, cost, and all of that, income is a highly important thing to know. And then by region. So like I do a lot of work in this, and I joke with everybody. Everyone like jokes about how much I love Fred Armisen, but if you like watch Fred Armisen's like videos on the different accents for different areas of Texas or Mexico or things like that, it's fascinating to consider how observation can arm you as a communicator or even an entertainer with these very subtle but very distinct differences between subcultures. And those are absolutely tools for writers. Okay, the colloquialisms, the slang, the ways that people communicate and convey ideas to one another, and the things that we all understand, depending on where you're from. So beginning to build kind of an understanding of how different regions, maybe of the US or then different regions of the world, communicate, and things that you can use in order to communicate with them more effectively. And then ongoing creative exercise. So everybody in my company knows, like, I live my life like observing people because I'm a writer and it's helpful. But I play a game with myself called The Kind of Person Who. And I build these like buckets of understanding. So anytime I'm out in public, I'm like the kind of person who will send back a latte for not being hot enough, right? Or the kind of person who tries on sunglasses in a store. Or the kind of person who goes out and inspects the lawn after the lawn guys have been there. Like there are all of these behaviors. I mean, humanity itself is gifting writers every single second of every single day with everything we need to succeed, if we'll just pay attention to it. And if we'll begin to organize and formalize our understanding of different types of people and how they behave, then we have an exceptional ability to make sense to them, which is really what marketing is about. We want to make sense to people in print and in copy in a way that is meaningful to them and helps a company build a better audience. So I would suggest to you very, very strongly that your absolute first evaluation criteria is audience. If what you understand an audience to be is different from what the client understands it to be, that's an important disconnect, right? And you guys have to be on the same page about who are we talking to. One of the most important things I do in a content strategy is a platform messaging analysis. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but basically what I do is I have a grid and it talks about all of the different platforms that you could possibly be on, right? Medium and Etsy and TikTok and all the things, right? And then I make clients sit down in this very simple grid and tell me, who are you talking to on this channel? Who is it, right? And then CTAs, what do you want them to do? We often don't do that in content strategy. We send out the audience across, we send out the same message to every possible segment of the audience, and that is a recipe for failure because it doesn't feel personal. So audience is the starting point. If you cannot know the audience, you cannot build a content strategy to reach them, because the who is the absolute most important part. Your reader is king, and they have to be able to understand what you're saying, and you have to have a method for reaching them effectively. Secondarily is product and competition. So too many startups that I've worked with, I've heard, we don't have any competitors. Yes, you do. And if you don't, that's actually a huge problem for you, because how do we shop? We go on Amazon, we look at reviews, and we look at people also viewed. We look at the related content, or the related products, because we don't know how much something should cost if we don't know how much something else like it costs. Comparables, are the absolute currency of buying decisions. We have to know, is this a good deal or not? Is this a good product or not? And we do that by comparing it to other things. So having competitors is very good and important, and knowing what your product is and how it is going to sell is very good and important. So I have a sales assessment. So I told you I was going to take you through like the ideas and the tools. The sales assessment that we have basically goes through, the very basics, like who buys from you? Why do people buy from you? Why do people stop buying from you? Any developed business should have answers to this question, but you will find more often than not that when you facilitate this conversation, which is really what consulting is, right? Facilitating meaningful conversations. When you facilitate this conversation, you're going to get different answers. And people are going to be surprised that their colleagues gave a different answer. And so I think it's very important, part of my onboarding, especially with consulting clients, is a multidisciplinary huddle, because I want to know what the sales executive says. I want to know what the marketing executive says. I want to know what the business development specialist says. Like, you have to kind of understand, because too many businesses get siloed, which makes their communication and their marketing communication extremely ineffective, because you don't have a shared understanding of who are we selling to and what are we selling. And a content strategy is all about facilitating the journey. It's all about getting people from A to Z in an intentional, ordered, measurable way. And so you need to be able to map the sales journey. And so these are the conversations that are really going to help people understand how are we getting our message across, and how are people actually transacting in a way that ultimately makes our company money, which is key and very, very important. I'll just say a word about competitive analysis. Competitive intelligence is extremely important if you're going to put together a content strategy. You have to know the language of the market. You have to know the language of other businesses in the industry, businesses that are much bigger than the one you're working for, much smaller than the one you're working for. You have to be able to do like a language mapping exercise. And that is really not something, like, a lot of the findings of this are things that are really helpful to kind of, document the journey you've taken intellectually and ideologically to get to the strategy that you deliver to a client. But it's also really important for you as a writer to have some things that you're discovering along this that you're simply logging for your own purposes. And part of it is mapping the competitive landscape, pulling out phrases, paying attention to taglines, reading ads from competitors, and getting kind of a linguistic map of like, here's how people in this space tend to talk. Because that you need to reference it, right? You need to be referential to it. But then if you want to be truly innovative, you've got to know like what's the baseline, what's normal in this industry, and then how can I riff? Like, how far can I kind of push it outside the bounds of what people are expecting me to do or say? You will absolutely set yourself up for success a lot more effectively if you engage in that activity and kind of keep your own notes. All right, we started with audience. We have to know the audience. We have to know the product. Then we have to know the channels. So this is that platform messaging analysis that I referenced a second ago. And so this is just an example of how I would set it up. And it's very simple, but essentially you want to know, what are all the platforms that you have built? So it's almost like a little bit of a digital discovery where you kind of go through and you say, all right, I've got all of these, we have profiles set up on all these platforms. You could include a website here. You could include email. You could include newsletter. You can kind of be a little bit flexible in how you're defining platform, not just thinking about social or something. I've got, blog on here, podcasts, things like that. So think about every available channel that a client has, write it out, and then talk actively to that client about what are the personas. Who are we actually talking to here? And we're not talking to everybody. If you have any channel on which you're talking to everybody, that is not a channel you're probably going to generate too much business through, unless you have a hyper-specific business, right? Most businesses sell more than one thing, and most businesses have more than one thing going, and it's important that you kind of have a diverse channel coverage and that you're omni-channel, but that every channel is not dealt with in exactly the same way. That would be a very, very elementary, basic content strategy that I would even probably not call a strategy. It's just kind of doing the same thing everywhere. And then what do we want them to do, right? Understanding that you are never going to call people to do more than two things. Okay, so my YouTube channel, I want you to subscribe, right? And then I want you to go read my blog, or I want you to download something. So in any given video, I'm not going to ask you to do more than 2 things. Okay, so that's pretty much where you would go through your channel analysis. So we had audience, product, channels, and then the last piece, and this is something I think a lot of writers don't do because they feel maybe like, oh, well, that's not really my job. And it's a little bit of a tech stack analysis, if I'm being candid. So part of it is evaluating like what systems does this client have in place? And it's seems kind of simple, but truly like I've gone through those first 3 steps so many times and almost like I've done this as an afterthought. But the truth is you won't be able to deploy certain strategies if you don't have certain systems set up. So like if they don't have a good CRM, then what is your email marketing really going to be able to do, right? If they don't have Google AdWords with any historical data or audiences built, the content strategy you recommend needs to be a little bit different than if they do have a very well-developed Google AdWords with audiences set up, okay? Or Meta business account with audiences, cultivated and tested and all of that. So you need to understand what systems are in place to facilitate deploying content out into the world and measuring its effectiveness. And you need to understand, how much they're willing to build, how much they're willing to invest in creating new systems if they don't already have them. So I think that is vitally important because you can't accurately recommend what somebody should do if you don't know how they're going to do it, okay? So if you think about it, I pretty much covered who, what, where, and how. Who, what, where, how. Audience, product, channels, systems. And I think that is then the way in which you can create a content map. So once I've done all of those 4 things and I've evaluated against all of those, I can put together what I have as a content map. And this is something that I've built over time and that I use all the time. This is one of those pieces of collateral that I think has a couple of different purposes. First of all, it's really helpful for me as a writer to have like kind of a measuring stick against which to evaluate the things that I continue to do and write and produce, right? Like, does this actually fit? Is there actually a topical content category for this? Is there actually an audience segment that's going to resonate with this? Do I have a way to deliver it, right? It just kind of like gut checks all the like exciting ideas that you come across. You kind of like bring them back to this and be like, okay, but does it fit on the map? And then I think it's really helpful to provide, especially executive level leaders, with a 1-pager. Give them 1 page of information that essentially summarizes everything that you've done with them. When you are starting out, especially as a content consultant, and you're beginning to kind of grow beyond just being a copywriter, it can be really tempting to want to over-explain all of your thought processes and be like, here are all the things that I went through to get to this conclusion. I can say from experience, when you move up the food chain in markets and you are, heading towards mid-level enterprise, okay, larger organizations and into the largest organizations, people don't want to see all of it. You need to have it. You need to have it to prove what you did. You need to have it to reference yourself. You need to have it for internal teams and marketing people and all of that, but you need to distill it. And your ability to distill it is actually probably the most important skill. Because if you can't say it simply, then you don't understand it fully yet. So it comes down to like condensing all of the thought processes, all of those 4 pillars, all of your evaluation into a strategy that you would then recommend and say like, here's exactly what we should do. And you keep it simple and you keep it actionable. Okay. So hopefully that wasn't like drinking from a fire hose, but I think that it is an incredibly powerful way to go about systematically evaluating a new business or a client, putting together a content strategy that you think is going to work. If you want to grow, if you want to move from being a copywriter into a content strategist, if you want to continue to refine your thinking in this way, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Instagram. I put up lots of things for writers and especially freelance writers, and I look forward to seeing how wonderful you do.